The message came on a night when Earth thought itself safe. Screens across cities flickered without warning, and the sky above filled with shapes too vast to mistake for human machines. A voice that was neither male nor female, translated into every language, spoke with the weight of a verdict. One of their own, a girl of their kind, had been killed while spying on Earth. For that crime, the galaxy demanded balance. 11 girls from Earth would be taken as restitution. They would be paraded as offerings, tokens to quiet a rage far older and colder than humanity's understanding. Panic spread faster than the transmission. Families locked doors, though no locks could keep out ships that moved faster than light. Governments convened emergency councils that lasted through the night, each leader's face pale as the implications sank in. The demand was not a negotiation. It was a decree. Failure to comply, the voice said, would mean consequences severe enough to erase nations before their people knew they were dying. News anchors read the words again and again until the syllables turned hollow. 11 girls, no more, no less. The number was precise, meant to sting, meant to make humanity choke on its helplessness. Mothers clutched daughters as if hiding them might make them invisible. Fathers cursed into the night, powerless against the galaxy that saw their children as tokens in a ledger of vengeance. The debate began with anger. Should Earth fight? Could Earth fight? The most powerful weapons humanity had ever built were, in truth, stones against an empire that traveled the stars. Yet compliance brought its own poison. To hand over children was to admit that humans had no spine, that dignity was a luxury they could not afford. Military commanders argued for caution, scientists spoke of preparation, politicians pleaded for time. Time was the one thing the galaxy refused to grant. As the hours dragged on, the first whispers of volunteers arose. Some parents, broken with fear, suggested names that might spare others. Others shouted them down, horrified that humanity could even consider feeding the innocent to appease a threat. Riots sparked in cities, voices splitting into camps of surrender or defiance. The world was no longer divided by nations but by the question, survival at any cost, or dignity at the price of annihilation. Amid the chaos, one voice cut through. It belonged not to a leader or a soldier, but to a young man who should have been too ordinary to matter. He stood in front of a broadcast camera in a city square, unarmed and unremarkable. His words were simple, but they carried the gravity of a challenge no one else dared to speak. "Why girls?" he asked. "Why not me? Why not those who can choose? Why children who never asked to fight your wars?" His defiance did not come in shouts or fury. It came in calm clarity, spoken with a conviction that silenced those around him. The camera lingered on his face, and for a moment, the billions watching saw not just a man but a reflection of themselves, the refusal to bend, the refusal to betray what made them human. He ended with words that struck deeper than any weapon. "If the galaxy wants blood, then take mine. If they want warriors, then face mine. But do not ask us to sacrifice our daughters. We are not a people who bow." The transmission spread faster than the alien decree. Phones lit up, feeds filled, and voices across the world echoed his question. "Why girls? Why not us?" His challenge sparked a fire that no council, no army, could contain. The young man's defiance became a seed of resistance, fragile but undeniable. Mothers who wept began to whisper prayers, fathers who cursed began to clench fists, children who hid began to dream of standing unbroken. The alien emissaries were not deaf to his words. They watched him with eyes colder than steel, and though they laughed at his audacity, they carried his face back to the council. To them, he was a curiosity, a primitive creature bold enough to bark at the hand that held its leash. But curiosity could be dangerous, and words, once spoken, could not be unsaid. On Earth, preparations continued. The ultimatum loomed, and leaders, weary and cornered, began to choose the 11 who would be taken. The boys' defiance lingered, but the machinery of fear moved on. The world braced itself for surrender, even as hope clung to a single question asked beneath an uncaring sky: "May a human stand instead?" If you enjoy the story, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. The day of selection arrived without ceremony. There were no ballots, no campaigns, only a cold mechanism of lottery carried out under alien supervision. Machines of unfamiliar design hummed in government halls as numbers were drawn, each one sealing a family's fate. 11 names. 11 daughters. The process was efficient, merciless, stripped of human dignity. When the last number appeared, silence followed. Then the sound of a mother's scream broke it apart. The chosen girls became more than individuals. Each represented a wound carved into humanity's pride. Some were barely more than children, others on the cusp of womanhood, all guilty of nothing but existence. Their faces spread across every screen. Some smiled through tears, forcing courage they didn't feel. Others trembled, unable to hide fear. Around them, families collapsed into grief, parents holding on until soldiers pried them away. The images burned themselves into the world's memory. They were not volunteers. They were sacrifices wrapped in flesh. In the midst of despair, the young man who had once asked why remained unshaken. He watched the process unfold and stepped forward once more. His voice reached the crowd, firm, deliberate. This is not justice. This is not balance. This is theft of our future. If blood must be paid, let it be from those who choose to give it. He looked toward the alien delegation and spoke louder, as if daring them to hear. I stand in their place. Take me. The words struck the crowd like lightning. Murmurs rippled through the air. Some gasped in awe, others in fear of what defiance might cost. The chosen girls stared at him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. One whispered, barely audible, "Why would you do this?" His answer carried the weight of a truth that cut through the chaos. Because we are more than pawns. Because if we let them take you, we are no longer human. The alien representatives reacted with mockery. Their forms shimmered in the light, voices laced with disdain. One body cannot replace 11, they declared. Your offering is insufficient. You are weak and foolish to imagine otherwise. But though they dismissed him, their amusement carried an undercurrent of unease. Defiance was not expected. Submission was the natural order. Yet this man spoke as if chains were already broken. The public felt the shift. For the first time since the ultimatum, hope flickered. People saw not just victims, but the possibility of resistance. Conversations erupted in homes, streets, and councils. What if humanity refused? What if they fought, even knowing the odds? The question that began with a single voice was now spreading like a contagion. The 11 girls, still bound by decree, became unwilling symbols of a choice the world had yet to make. Governments, fearing total destruction, tried to silence the rising storm. Leaders declared the lottery final. The girls would go. They spoke of duty, survival, and the greater good. But their words felt hollow next to the boy's conviction. He needed no podium, no office. His truth required only the courage to say what others feared: survival without dignity is not living. On the day the aliens came to collect their tribute, crowds lined the streets. The girls were escorted in armored vehicles, surrounded by soldiers who looked more like mourners than guards. Their families walked behind, some wailing, some silent with rage. The world watched, and though no weapons were raised, the atmosphere felt like the brink of war. Then the boy appeared again. He stepped into the path of the convoy, unarmed, unshielded, standing between the aliens and their prize. His voice carried above the silence. If you want to test humanity, then test me. If you want blood, spill mine. If you want warriors, face us. But do not demand innocence as payment for crimes we did not commit. The soldiers froze, torn between orders and conscience. The girls looked at him, their eyes alight with a strength they thought lost. For a moment, they were no longer prey. They were witnesses to defiance. The alien envoy studied him with an expression unreadable to human eyes. Then came a sound that might have been laughter or contempt. You are insects shouting at storms, it said. Yet the council would hear of this. His refusal to yield had become too visible, too disruptive, to ignore. The 11 girls were taken aboard the ship regardless, but the boy was no longer just a face in a crowd. He had marked himself as a challenge to the order of the galaxy. As the vessel rose into the sky, humanity felt the sting of loss, but also the spark of something greater. The chosen were gone, yet their departure carried not only despair but the seed of resistance. The boy's words echoed in the hearts of millions. Why them? Why not us? And for the first time since the demand was made, the galaxy itself began to wonder what kind of people Earth truly was. The alien vessel that carried the 11 was meant to be a prison, a silent ark of fear, but humanity's story did not end at its departure. Hidden among supply crates, bruised and breathless, the young man who had dared to speak had smuggled himself aboard. He carried no weapon, only the certainty that surrender would mean extinction of spirit long before extinction of flesh. When the doors sealed behind him, he did not see chains but opportunities. The ship was alive with technology far beyond human reach. Corridors hummed with alien energy, walls shifting with symbols no one on Earth could read. Yet the boy's eyes searched not for meaning but for weakness. A pipe leaking condensation, a panel unsecured, a rhythm to the patrols, all became maps of survival. The girls, despairing in their cell, looked up in disbelief when he appeared, whispering a promise they had thought impossible. "You are not alone." At first they resisted him, not with hatred but with fear. To hope was dangerous, and to act seemed foolish against such power. But his conviction was relentless. He told them that submission was the true death, that courage could wound even giants. Slowly, their silence cracked. One offered her hairpin, another a strip of cloth, each fragment insignificant until joined together as tools of resistance. With nothing but fragments, they began to sabotage the ship. Lights flickered, doors jammed, alarms blared without cause. The aliens dismissed it as malfunction, never imagining humans could twist their machines with bare hands and desperation. The turning point came when they reached the engine's cooling ducts. The boy led them through narrow passages where alien guards never bothered to look. With a stolen shard of metal, he severed a line no human engineer would have recognized, guided only by instinct that even perfection has flaws. The ship shuddered, slowed, and for the first time the aliens realized their captives were not docile. Panic spread among the crew. The galaxy had never seen prisoners who treated chains as opportunities. News of the sabotage spread quickly once relays reported it. The council called it minor. A single ship disrupted, nothing more. But the truth was more dangerous than the damage. Whispers traveled between species shackled under council rule. Humans fought back. They did not cower, they did not yield, they turned cages into battlegrounds. In marketplaces and slave pits across distant worlds, beings who had long forgotten rebellion spoke the name of Earth with wonder. The aliens responded with force. Guards stormed the corridors, weapons raised, confident that fear would restore order. Yet the girls, once trembling, now stood alongside the boy. They had learned to fight not with strength but with unity. One threw herself against a guard, another jammed machinery into a weapon's barrel, and in the chaos, the boy struck with pharaoh precision. They were outmatched in every measure but one, resolve. To the crew's astonishment, resolve proved the most dangerous weapon of all. The rebellion aboard the ship lasted minutes, but its echo lasted longer. The humans were recaptured, beaten, paraded before the crew as proof that defiance was futile. Yet even bloodied, they did not bow. The boy spat at the floor and said, "If you fear us this much, then you already know who is stronger." The words traveled farther than chains ever could. Even in defeat, humanity had claimed a kind of victory. Across the stars, systems watched in silence. Some dismissed it as madness. Others, bound by generations of oppression, recognized the spark they had lost. A race so new to the stars, so fragile, had shown them a truth: dignity is worth more than survival. And once that truth was spoken, it could not be forgotten. The council convened, furious that Earth's defiance had become a spectacle. Their intent had been to break humanity quickly, to make an example of them. Instead, they had created a symbol. The boy, nameless to most, had become a figure larger than himself. Not a soldier, not a king, not a commander, simply a human who refused. That refusal spread faster than fear, igniting corners of the galaxy long thought pacified. The ship limped to its destination, scarred not by battle but by humiliation. The 11 and the boy were dragged before judges who saw them not as captives but as problems to be solved. Yet even as chains clinked, their eyes held no submission. The boy looked at the tribunal and spoke with a calmness that unsettled even the powerful. You can take us, but you cannot unmake what we have shown. The galaxy knows now that humans will not bow. And in that moment, the Council understood the danger was no longer Earth's weapons or armies. The danger was humanity itself, its will unbroken, its defiance contagious. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy trembled, not at fleets or empires, but at the idea that courage could spread like fire. The chamber of judgment was carved from light and shadow, a hall where the most powerful beings of the galaxy presided. The humans were dragged forward, their wounds still fresh from the ship's revolt, their chains rattling against the polished floor. The council had gathered in full strength, each delegate representing a civilization older than Earth's written history. They expected fear. They expected pleading. What they received was silence, unbroken and unyielding. The boy stood at the front, his head high though his body bore the marks of defiance. The girls, though shaken, mirrored his posture. Their captors had failed to strip them of dignity. Charges were read in 1,000 tongues: rebellion, sabotage, contempt of authority, refusal to comply with lawful tribute. To the council, these crimes warranted swift execution. Yet hesitation hung in the air. The humans had become more than prisoners, they had become symbols. Destroying them outright risked making martyrs, and martyrs were dangerous. So the trial stretched on, a performance of authority. Witnesses spoke of Earth's arrogance, of primitive creatures daring to bite the hand that reached across the stars. The council waited for fear to surface, for trembling voices to beg for mercy. Instead, the boy asked for none. When allowed to speak, he wasted no words. He did not appeal for pity, nor did he deny the charges. He admitted them all with pride. He declared that humanity had chosen dignity over obedience, that they would never give their daughters as tribute to appease a foreign empire. His voice was steady, carrying across the chamber like a blade. We may lack your weapons, he said, but we are not without worth. If you think we are weak, then you misunderstand what makes us dangerous. It is not strength of arms. It is strength of will. Some delegates sneered, dismissing his words as the noise of a desperate species. Yet others listened, stirred by an unfamiliar sensation, envy. Their worlds had bent to the council centuries ago, trading defiance for survival, forgetting what it meant to resist. Here stood creatures barely out of their cradle, willing to challenge authority with nothing but conviction. For those long subdued, the boy's speech was not madness but a reminder of what they had lost. The council attempted to counter his defiance with threats. They promised the annihilation of Earth if compliance did not follow. They described cities reduced to ash, oceans boiled away, generations erased. Yet the boy's response carried no hesitation. Then burn us. Erase us. But understand this, if we must vanish, we vanish as ourselves, not as your slaves. We will not live at the cost of our children. The words struck like thunder. Even in the silence that followed, the weight of them remained. Among the delegates, murmurs grew. A faction demanded immediate extermination, fearing the contagion of rebellion. Another urged caution, warning that executing the humans would ignite unrest across controlled worlds. Already, fragments of rebellion stirred in distant colonies. Already, voices rose in secret, inspired by a people no one had expected to matter. Earth had become a catalyst, not through strength but through defiance. The trial spiraled into debate, but the humans remained steady. The girls, once terrified of their fate, found themselves transformed. They were no longer victims of selection but witnesses to their own rebirth. Each one bore scars of captivity, but each carried herself with the same refusal that shone from the boy. Their silence was louder than protest, a testament that submission would never again define them. The council, cornered by its own spectacle, chose escalation. If rebellion was contagious, then fear must be louder. The humans would not be quietly executed. Instead, they would be paraded as proof of the council's dominance, displayed across the stars as examples of what happened to those who dared defy. Yet even in this decision, cracks appeared. Some delegates abstained, unwilling to tie themselves to a course that might unravel empires. Their hesitation was noticed. When the judgment was declared, the boy only smiled. It was not the smile of victory but of recognition. He understood the council's mistake. By giving him a stage, by forcing him to speak in front of the galaxy, they had already lost the silence they depended on. His words were carried beyond the chamber, repeated across networks, spread through whispers in markets and prisons alike. For every threat the council voiced, his refusal echoed louder. Escorted back to confinement, he turned once more to the judges and left them with a final warning. You believe we are small, that we cannot harm you. But one spark is enough to light a fire, and you have scattered sparks across every world you rule. You think you hold us in chains. In truth, you are the ones who fear us. The delegates did not answer, but the silence that followed was heavier than any verdict. They knew that the boy was right. The council's verdict was meant to crush, but it had the opposite effect. Across the galaxy, the image of a chained boy refusing to bow spread faster than the judgment itself. Oppressed species who had long accepted silence began to stir. The idea of humanity, small and unarmed yet unbroken, became a spark of rebellion whispered in corridors where hope had long been outlawed. Soldiers of the council tightened their grip, but fear of uprising gnawed at the edges of their empire. On Earth, the ultimatum hardened into war. The council expected surrender, but instead they found a planet unwilling to yield. Humanity could not match fleets or weapons, yet they had something far more dangerous: refusal to die quietly. Factories once meant for peace turned to war production. Guerrilla networks formed in shadows. Farmers, engineers, students, and soldiers alike began to prepare for an enemy that thought them irrelevant. Earth's leaders, once divided, found themselves united not by politics but by necessity. They had been shown the cost of submission, and they chose resistance. The first battles were massacres. Council warships tore through defenses as easily as storms break branches. Yet for every city destroyed, resistance hardened. Fighters who survived carried back knowledge. Weak points in armor, patterns in patrols, vulnerabilities in communication. The boy's words had seeded not despair but ingenuity. Humanity began to fight like water, adapting, flowing where the enemy was weakest, striking from shadows. Against overwhelming might, they answered with persistence. Against technology centuries ahead, they answered with creativity born of desperation. The 11 girls, once chosen as tribute, now stood transformed. No longer symbols of helplessness, they became leaders in their own right. Each carried the memory of captivity, each bore scars of chains, but none allowed themselves to remain defined by them. One became a strategist, turning sabotage into art. Another rallied militias across continents, her voice carrying the fire the boy had ignited. Together, they became more than survivors. They became commanders of defiance. Their presence reminded every fighter why the war mattered. They were proof that humanity did not offer its daughters to be consumed. Humanity raised them to stand unbroken. The boy himself remained at the center of the storm. He was no general, no ruler, but his defiance had become a banner. On every battlefield, soldiers carried his words like shields. He walked among them, wounded but never silent, reminding all who followed that their fight was not just for Earth but for every world that longed for freedom. When the Council unleashed propaganda, calling humanity reckless, dangerous, doomed, his voice countered with the simple truth: dignity was worth the price of blood. The war stretched beyond Earth. In corners of the galaxy thought pacified, sparks turned to flames. Species who had bent to the Council began to rise, inspired by the audacity of humans. Some offered resources, others struck at their captors, weakening the Council's grip. What began as punishment for a single planet grew into unrest across dozens of systems. The Council's fleets, once symbols of unquestioned control, now stretched thin against enemies they had not faced in generations. Humanity had awakened the galaxy to its own chains. In the final confrontation, Earth was surrounded. Fleet after fleet descended, prepared to erase the planet once and for all. Humanity stood at its last line, armed with weapons scarcely enough to matter. Yet the boy stepped forward once more, not to plead but to declare. His words carried not only to Earth but across the networks of countless worlds. We are not fighting only for our lives. We are fighting for every voice you have silenced, every people you have chained. Destroy us, and you will face not victory but rebellion without end. For we are not afraid to die free. The council hesitated. Their fleets outnumbered humanity 1,000 to 1, yet hesitation spread like rot. Reports came from every sector, uprisings, revolts, defections. The galaxy was unraveling, not because of weapons but because of belief. The longer humanity stood, the more others rose. The council realized too late that annihilating Earth would not extinguish the flame, it would make it eternal. The war did not end in glorious triumph. Cities were ash, oceans scarred, generations lost. But humanity endured. The fleets withdrew, not from mercy but from necessity. The council could not crush what had already spread beyond their reach. And in the silence that followed, the galaxy whispered of Earth with reverence. A species that refused to bow, a people who turned chains into weapons, daughters into leaders, and a single boy into legend. The galaxy remembered the question that began it all. When tribute was demanded, a human asked not for mercy but for the chance to stand. "May I join the war?" he said. And in doing so, he had given the galaxy an answer it could never forget. Humanity was small, fragile, mortal, but humanity was unbreakable.